This is a short presentation on profit, gross margin, and productivity. As we've said in this segment on the simple numbers, gross margin percentage and the productivity of your people are the two biggest levers you have to profitability, and they're the only ones really that you have a lot of control over. So we're going to look at what they are, what they mean, and how they affect and how you can affect them to increase your profits.
So let's look at that big elephant in the room. We talked about the beliefs behind profits, and the first was forecasting. Well, forecasts are just a prediction. You do them once a quarter, once a year, and they're just kind of a prediction of where we think we're going to be. I don't know what value they do other than help you budget. And what budgets are all about is focusing on expenses and nitpicking them and trying to reduce them and cut them here and cut them there and get a little $1,000 here and $500 there. I don't think that's of much value. But the biggest item on your line item is a budget payroll expense. It's the largest item on the expense account. And usually what we do is we take it and we look at it as being a stable number for next year, and we add 2 or 3% for raises, and we walk away and forget about it. I suggest that budget for payroll ought to be not an expense but an investment. We need to learn how to take that big number of labor and get the best return that we can on it instead of just ignoring it and raising it a little bit. The way you increase profits is you got to increase your prices and reduce your costs. Those are the two things we've always looked at, and they get harder to do the more you try to do them. You can't let your employees know. No way, because if they know what we're making, they're going to want more. And at the end of the year, the CPA is going to come in, and you're going to talk about how do we reduce our profits this year. We had a good year. So that truck we don't need, let's buy that truck. We'll spend $1 to save 40 cents. Or some revenue, let's push it out into next year. Kick that can down the road because we don't want to pay taxes. It's no way to run a business. And remember what Greg Crabtree says, you cannot build wealth unless you pay taxes. So those beliefs I'm suggesting are holding us back.
So what is gross margin? Gross margin, of course, is your revenues, and you subtract out your cost of goods sold without labor in it. That was a point we've tried to make over and over again. If in your P&L today there is a labor equation or any labor in your cost of goods sold, rearrange your P&L to put that down in expenses and take it out of your cost of goods sold. We want to get a total for all your labor costs, and we don't want any of that in our cost of goods sold. So gross margin is the cost of goods sold without labor subtracted from your revenue, sometimes called gross profit. And what are the three factors in gross margin? Well, first is cost. If you sell products or you resell products or you manufacture products, it's the cost. If I can get those costs down, if I can buy things less expensively if I'm reselling them, that's one way to affect gross margin and increase it. Because as I decrease my cost of goods sold, of course, I'm increasing my gross margin, gross profit. The other is price, how we price things. If I increase my prices, I can increase my gross margin percentage. If I decrease it, I'm liable to decrease my gross margin percentage. I will. And then mix. We all have products that we sell and services. Some carry higher gross margins and profits than others. So it's a matter of focusing on and putting together strategies to sell more of those products and services that have higher gross margins than lower, and your overall gross margin percentage will move up. Then there's labor productivity. As we said, that's a biggest investment and the biggest lever we have to profitability, and one that we don't look at properly in most businesses. So we'll talk about different ways to track that, but revenue per FTE is a simple one. My favorite is employee contribution margin, and we'll talk about that in the rest of the lesson. The other part we talked about was benchmarking. Getting these numbers together and benchmarking these numbers against others in your industry, the best in your industry, is going to be very, very valuable to you. So what you pay for things, or what your costs are for things you resell, I can't help you a lot with that other than you've always done that. You've probably always tried to get those costs down as much as you can. There may not be a lot of opportunity there, but there definitely is in price. And think about price this way. Your price should be equal to or slightly less than the value you bring to your ideal customer. I've seen too many people that discount, and discounting's a bad habit, or they base their prices on cost, or they base their prices on what the non-ideal customers out there are willing to pay for something, because I don't want to lose them. I want to get every deal I can get. All those things are bad ways to price. So I want to talk a little bit about price elasticity and talk about the power of pricing, because a little bit of price increase that nobody will even notice can have a big impact on your bottom line. Reducing the price of a product to try to be competitive with everybody else in the marketplace and not really getting money for the value you're providing to people is going to take your profitability way down. One of my favorite quotes about pricing is always remember there's someone out there willing to go out of business before you are. The last lever we have in gross margin is mix. As I said, everyone's usually got different products and services, and they all carry a different gross margin percentage. The percent of sales you get from these different areas affects your overall gross margin. If you've got one product that has a 50% gross margin and another product that's 40, and you sell equal amounts of those, then you're going to overall be a 45% gross margin. But if you sell more of the 50, you're going to move up. So that's a simple thing to think about, but it takes some strategy to go in there and look at your pricing, look at your product lines, and find out what your gross margin is by product line. It's something maybe you haven't done. Maybe you have services, maybe you have parts, maybe you have other products, but you need to know, at least in groups, what the profitability or gross margin of those individual groups are. And it's pretty simple then. Just focus on the higher margin products and services. Anything you focus on will grow. So, you may treat some of these things as just drag-alongs or nice to haves. If you start focusing your marketing and focusing your salespeople and sending them to sell the higher gross margin products, you'll sell more of them. Hopefully they're also recurring revenues. So in other words, hopefully your higher margin products or services are things that are recurring, because to really build a profitable, valuable business, the more recurring revenue you have, the better. So that when you walk in the morning and turn the key, you know you're going to have X amount of this kind of profitability of product coming through the door, whether you do anything or not. So I said my favorite productivity number to look at is employee contribution margin. It's really taking your total revenue, subtracting out your cost of goods sold without labor, which is, of course, gross margin dollars. We've been talking about that a lot. And then subtract out the total cost of your labor, your salary, benefits, salaries, commissions, hourly wage, whatever it is that goes into that labor component, benefits, workman's comp, insurance, that goes in there. Whatever that total cost is, subtract that from your gross margin, and what you get is contribution margin. You take that and divide by the number of full-time equivalents you have, and you come up with a number of employee contribution margin dollars. So in other words, if my contribution margin was $100,000, I have 5 employees, my contribution margin per employee is going to be $20,000. Which really means that for every individual I have, they're generating $20,000 worth of contribution margin. You can go back and look at prior quarters and see what that number is when you were making really good profit and you had really good productivity per FTE, and you can look at it now and look at it in the future to predict what your profitability is going to be off of that number. So I hope I've convinced you that there's 2 big profit levers in your profitability. One is gross margin percentage and how you can affect that, and the other is the productivity of your people. It's the biggest one there probably is, and the one that we don't do a lot with and don't understand. So it really comes down to people productivity. That one number directly relates to profit, that contribution margin per employee. So how do we improve it? How do we leverage it? Well, we're not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about that in a couple of lessons down the road. But it's all about coaching people, bringing A players into every position, and looking at labor as an investment. And how am I getting the most return on that investment I'm making in every labor dollar?